everyone, and welcome to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson. You know, President Trump has been in office for less than 3 months, and he's off to a very fast start delivering on his campaign promises. However, multiple lawsuits have followed him. There's been a real challenge. And here to help us to understand the underlying issues of these suits is Mike Davis of Article 3 Project. Now, Mike is the former chief counsel for nominations to Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley, where he advised on the confirmation of federal judges, including Brett Kavanaugh, and a record number of circuit judges during President Trump's first 2 years in office. As the founder of Article 3 Project, he's an outspoken defender of the Constitution and of constitutionalist judges and the rule of law. So, Mike, thank you so much for what you've done to preserve freedom in our country, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. I am a big fan of yours, so thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. Well, you know, there are a lot of legal challenges to President Trump's executive orders, and we can understand why he does these executive orders, otherwise wouldn't get anything done. But what's your general assessment of the legal pushback that the Trump administration is facing so early on?
President Trump campaigned on the fact that he's going to hire Elon Musk, set up the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. He's going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. He's going to secure our border, and he's going to get illegal immigrants, particularly foreign terrorists, the hell out of our country. And President Trump is doing the unthinkable. He's actually doing what he promised American voters he would do, and he's doing it fast. The president has a broad electoral mandate, 312 electoral votes, all 7 swing states, the popular vote. He kept the House. He won a comfortable majority in the Senate. He is ready to lead on day one, and he is leading boldly and decisively. And
Amen.
He's not stealing legislative power under Article 1 from Congress. He's not stealing the Supreme Court's judicial power under Article 3. He's exercising core Article 2 power to hire and fire, to have troop morale and readiness improved, to secure our border, to repel an invasion. And these activist plaintiffs have nowhere to run because they got smoked in the last election. So they are running to their activist judges, particularly in these Democrat cities like DC, New York, San Francisco, and they are getting these illegal injunctions, temporary restraining orders that are sabotaging the presidency. This is not judicial review. This is judicial sabotage.
And have we ever seen anything like that before?
No, this is an unprecedented number of temporary restraining orders that aren't temporary at all. And it's gotten so bad, Dr. Carson, that these activist plaintiffs and activist judges have even sabotaged the president's ability to conduct foreign affairs. You had Judge Ali, a new Biden judge who got jammed through the lame duck session after the Democrats lost the election. He barely got confirmed. They brag he's the first Muslim and the first Arab judge in D.C. And this judge ordered the president to disperse $2 billion in foreign aid from USAID after President Trump said he wanted to do a temporary pause to do a national security review to make sure, for example, we're not funding Hamas terrorists who are killing Americans under the guise of Gaza humanitarian relief, to make sure that we're not funding waste, fraud, and abuse like transgender mice research in Durka land or wherever the hell we were spending that money. And this Judge Ali ordered the president to send those checks out, even though the president has a constitutional duty under Article 2 to take care that our laws are faithfully executed. Right? He has to make sure we're not funding our enemies and funding waste, fraud, and abuse. The Supreme Court allowed that to happen several weeks ago, and that only emboldened these radical judges. And now we have D.C. Obama judge Jeb Boasberg, who thinks he can open up his courtroom during the middle of an ongoing military operation, expose the operation, endanger the lives of America and our allies, sabotage the operation by telling planes to turn around with planes full of the worst terrorists in the Western Hemisphere and gangbangers from Tren de Aragua and MS-13. these judges are out of control. Fortunately, the Supreme Court is finally stepping up and getting its judicial house in order, because Congress is very emboldened right now to do it for them.
Well, what is the exact ruling that the Supreme Court came with last night?
Yeah, the ruling was, there's the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, and the president, when there is an unlawful foreign incursion into our country tied to a state, like what's happening with Trinidad and Venezuela, the president has the absolute statutory power and duty, along with the Article 2 constitutional power and duty, to repel this invasion, to get these terrorists the hell out of our country. And that's exactly what President Trump has done. Now, these activist plaintiffs ran to Judge Boasberg in D.C. He doesn't have jurisdiction over this case. That's what the Supreme Court just held. This Judge Boasberg, who endangered American and allied lives trying to turn around planes, even though he doesn't know the fuel levels, even though he doesn't know the security footprint in America. We saw the security footprint in El Salvador, where they had hundreds of intel, military, law enforcement officials ready to take the worst terrorist in the Western Hemisphere. Why would we have that in America? Why would we think a judge is going to order planes to turn around? We didn't. Why would a foreign leader want to deal with the president of the United States on a high-risk operation like this if that foreign leader thought that an activist judge could expose it and sabotage it? What would have happened if we didn't land those planes? We would have made that El Salvadorian president look like a fool, right? And so the Supreme Court told Judge Jeb Boasberg, you don't have jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is in Texas, from where these planes took off. If these terrorists want to file a habeas petition, it's in Texas, not D.C.
Well, do you think that this judgment last night will tamp down some of the temporary restraining orders and things that are going on around the country?
Well, it should. There was also a ruling on Friday where the Supreme Court, I think Justice Amy Coney Barrett, finally got her head on right, because before she said that she's a civil procedure professor, right? She's a Notre Dame civil procedure professor. And she says, well, these judges are calling these orders temporary restraining orders. And under the federal rules of civil procedure, temporary restraining orders are not appealable, right? Not immediately appealable. So they called it a TRO, so it's not appealable. Well, she needs to understand, and she finally got this, that just because these activist judges are slapping the TRO label on it doesn't make it a TRO. When you're sending $2 billion in foreign aid out the door, it's not coming back. It's not temporary. It's permanent, right? And so she finally joined a Supreme Court ruling on Friday on DEI funding, where they said, okay, we're not going to get fooled by these TRO labels anymore. And then you have the Supreme Court slapping down Boasberg yesterday. But look, he's doubling down. He just issued an order saying that, we want to proceed. If the parties want to bring different claims, we want to proceed. And he may still try to hold Trump officials in contempt of court for not turning around the planes full of terrorists and bringing them back to America.
Well, the Constitution says that Congress has oversight of all the lower courts, everything except the Supreme Court. And that being the case, what needs to be done with these radical left-wing or right-wing, whatever they are?
Well, I would say this. I was the chief counsel for nominations on the Senate Judiciary Committee with the oversight portfolio. I think we also have oversight over the Supreme Court, but we definitely have oversight over the lower federal courts. And I'm working with Senator Chuck Grassley, my former boss, the Senate Judiciary Chairman, along with Senator Mike Lee and members of the House, to bring much needed reforms to these courts to make sure that they can't issue these nationwide injunctions. They can't issue these TROs. The judicial power under Article 3 is contained to cases or controversies with parties before the courts who have redressable claims. This idea that these courts can issue nationwide injunctions that for parties that aren't before the court is unconstitutional. That's beyond their Article 3 power. Also, the D.C. District Court spent 4 years persecuting Trump supporters, according to the Supreme Court's Fisher decision. It sounds like with all these Trump pardons and commutations of sentences, they have a lot more time on their hands. And I know that the D.C. Superior Court which handles the DC street crimes, is understaffed. And I think it's unconstitutional because the president doesn't get to pick the judges. He gets to select from 3 judges presented to him by the DC Democrat radicals. And so what I recommend Congress does is get rid of the DC district or the DC Superior Court, have the DC District Court with all these Obama and Biden radicals, along with these Republican wimps, have them take the DC Superior Court's jurisdiction, have them do DC street crimes and DC civil disputes, and then randomly draw judges from around the country to handle all other cases. So we're not having the cases with national impact decided by the same Democrat radicals and Republican wimps.
You said a mouthful there.
I always do.
Now, isn't it true that the president, when he makes these decisions about national security, has a whole plethora of people and information presented to him, which these judges don't have, and it seems absolutely absurd that with their limited knowledge that they can undo something like that. It would seem to be dangerous to the security of the nation.
It is very absurd. It's highly illegal and very dangerous. What Judge Boasberg did was unacceptable. He crossed the red line. It wasn't the fact that he was trying to rule on the legal issue, whether the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 applied. He can do that. He didn't have jurisdiction, but even if he made a mistake there, that's not the red line. What the red line was is that he exposed an ongoing military operation. He endangered the president's ability to conduct foreign affairs with a foreign leader. He put American and allied lives in grave danger. If those planes would have crashed, he would have been directly responsible for it. If those planes would have returned and we didn't have the security footprint and those terrorist escapes, he would have been directly responsible for it. You're exactly right, Dr. Carson. The Supreme Court has made crystal clear over the last many centuries that federal judges should not meddle with the president's commander-in-chief powers. He is the chief executive officer. He's the commander-in-chief. Under the Constitution, he has all executive power. He has the executive power, all executive power, right? He's one elected president who runs our foreign affairs. And for these judges to think that they can meddle in this because Judge Boasberg got appointed by Chief Justice John Roberts to the FISA court. I mean, I want to say to Boasberg, are your law clerks, are these nerds you hired from Harvard Law School, are they also Green Berets? Because I don't know who the hell you think is going to go enforce your order, because I don't think your pencil-necked law nerds from Harvard Law School are going to do it.
Well, do you think the Supreme Court will actually get in the middle of this TRO issue and try to clarify it? Because it has long-term implications for our country.
Yeah, I mean, they did that. The Supreme Court started to do this, and it did a pretty decent job at this on Friday. There was a DEI case out of for grants out of the Department of Education, and that's where the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 ruling, laid out that that what it means to be a TRO versus an injunction, and these judges are not issuing temporary restraining orders. There's nothing temporary about them, and so the Supreme Court has made it clear they're not going to play that game, that if a judge issues an injunction, those are immediately appealable. What they're trying to do is they're trying to bleed out the administration. They're trying to delay, because the president, they know, has 2 years before the midterm elections. Who knows what happens after the midterm elections? If the Democrats win the House and or the Senate, then it's going to be a tough road to hoe for the next 2 years for President Trump. And so President Trump is focused intensely on this next 2 years. So every week, every 2 weeks, every month, every 2 months that you can take away from the president, that is valuable time. And I would say to these judges, can we take away your judicial power for even a second, let alone 2 weeks or 2 months? No. And so how the heck do you think you can take away the president's executive power for even a second?
Well, switching topics, you made reference to the executive order dealing with DEI. In regard to determination of federal DEI initiatives, and contractors happen to certify that they don't promote DEI, including universities, to get money. Is that something that they're permitted to do constitutionally?
Is it
Would
permissible for government entities to illegally discriminate against people based upon their race or their sex? No, that's obviously illegal. It's obviously unconstitutional. And whether you're discriminating against black people or you're discriminating against white people, that is clearly illegal. Not only is it unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment for any government to do it, under the Fifth Amendment for the governments to do it, under the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment, it violates our federal civil rights laws. And so I hope these woke universities understand they are exposing themselves to astronomical financial liability for this pattern and practice, this blatant racial discrimination they call DEI. And as you and I both know, Dr. Carson, this has nothing to do with race. They're trying to use race as their front to push their Marxism. Because guess what? I don't see these Democrats who are pushing DEI fighting very hard for any African American or women or minority conservative. Actually, as you know from firsthand experience, black conservatives get treated pretty poorly.
absolutely. Well, the other side is claiming that banning DEI programs amounts to suppression of speech and interference with the First Amendment. Do they have any validity in that argument?
So does that mean that white people can discriminate against black people based upon their free speech rights? I think that's a silly argument. They're basically saying that it's okay to have racial discrimination under the First Amendment if it's against white people and Asian people, but if it's the other way around, it's illegal. That's obviously absurd on its face.
How do we stop the courts from setting policy?
Well,
Because that's not what they're supposed to do, is it?
no, they're supposed to be the least dangerous branch. They have a very modest but crucial role. That is to decide cases and controversies from the parties before them who have redressable claims. It's a really important role because if we didn't have a strong judiciary, we would end up in civil wars because we wouldn't be able to resolve our disputes. But these judges have taken it upon themselves to think that the least dangerous branch is supposed to become the most powerful branch, that there's somehow this judicial supremacy where they get to decide national policy. And that I can't think of anything more dangerous. Congress, our elected representatives in Congress, along with our elected president, get to decide policy. They're the political branches. The judicial branch, they have lifetime tenure. They have pay protection. They are intentionally insulated from the American people because they are supposed to protect the minority, right? They're supposed to protect minority rights. They're supposed to protect the least powerful among us. They're not supposed to be a majoritarian branch of government that imposes popular will. It's supposed to be the opposite, right? So they're not, so we're protecting minority rights. And these activist judges are legislating from the bench, and it must stop. And what needs to happen is Congress and the president needs to be a lot more aggressive with these judges. When they are in their judicial lane, they have the judicial power. They get to decide cases and controversies no one else does.
Right.
But if they try to steal legislative power from Congress or the president's executive power, they need to be slapped down and slapped down hard. I always say when these federal judges take off their judicial robes and climb into the political arena and throw political punches, they need to receive powerful political counterpunches because it is very dangerous for these lifetime appointed pay protected judges to take other power from other branches.
What is involved in the impeachment of a federal judge?
Well, I've never called for the impeachment of a federal judge before Jeff Boasberg, but I think that he has definitely met that standard of an impeachable offense for bad behavior as a federal judge, because not only was his order extremely unlawful, as the Supreme Court just made crystal clear, it was very dangerous, right? When you are exposing and sabotaging an ongoing military operation, I can't think of anything more dangerous. Again, what if those planes would have crashed? What if those planes would have been hijacked as they're turned around and the terrorist on board are emboldened? What if we didn't have that security footprint in America? What if we would have run out of fuel? It's just unbelievably dangerous what Judge Boasberg did. And this is why the House should move forward with impeachment proceedings. I don't care if we don't have the votes. I want the process to be the punishment, to serve as a deterrent, and to make sure these judges understand when you play political games, you're going to get political prizes.
Well, in the House, you only have to have a majority.
Yep.
But for the Senate, it has to be a supermajority, doesn't it?
2/3. Yeah, but you know what? Have the impeachment process in the House, send it to the Senate. They refer it to a committee and have a trial, right? And if Boasberg is sitting in a trial, he's not going to be running to his courthouse on a Saturday when he doesn't even have the emergency docket, opening up his courthouse, exposing these ongoing military operation and endangering lives. So let's make this a zero-sum game. If Boasberg, and it's also amazing to me, Dr. Carson, for 4 years, these DC judges persecuted January 6th defendants. According to the Supreme Court's Fisher ruling, they didn't give a damn about due process rights for Americans. But all of a sudden, they want to climb over glass to try to give due process rights to terrorists who are kidnapping, robbing, raping, torturing, and murdering Americans. When Jeb Boasberg shows any interest in due process for Americans, I'll start listening to him for due process for foreign terrorists.
Amazing. Now, I just have one more area I want to cover quickly because I know your time is limited. One of President Trump's first executive orders had to do with birthright citizenship. Now, for folks who are not constitutional lawyers like most of us, what does the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment mean, and how has it traditionally been understood by the courts?
Well, it's been misapplied for a long time because the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship gave citizenship to freed African American slaves' children, right? That was the point of it. And if you look at the jurisprudence under the Birthright Citizen Clause, American Indians did not even have birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. That was granted to them by Congress. And it is certainly not the case that ambassadors' kids do not get birthright citizenship. You certainly do not get birthright citizenship for an invading force. So why the heck would you give birthright citizenship to illegal immigrants who have come to our country illegally and they're invading our country, right? The birthright citizenship clause, if you look at the Chinese exclusion cases, they are for lawful permanent residents, people who are here lawfully and who show allegiance to the United States. Those children get birthright citizenship, not illegal immigrants who come to our country. Do we think that Tren de Aragua, these foreign terrorists who are coming to destroy our country, if they have kids, that their kids should get birthright citizenship and then these terrorists get chain migration and citizenship because their kids do? That's not how birthright citizenship works. President Trump is exactly right. These courts have got this wrong for decades, and they need to get this right.
Some logic and common sense would go a long way here, wouldn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Now, what constitutional path forward should be taken? I mean, how do we protect the president's Article 2 powers while respecting the role of the courts?
Well, I have never called for a judge's order to ever be ignored until Boasberg's order, just because it was so lawless and so dangerous. I've never called for impeachment before for a judge until Judge Boasberg ordered those planes turned around and then wants to hold officials in contempt for not turning around the planes. And so I think it's a very high standard for impeachment. I think it's a very high standard for ignoring an order. It has to be obviously lawless and extremely dangerous, particularly to our national security. But in the meantime, there are many other ways you can hold these judges accountable. You can hold them accountable through oversight hearings. You can cut their funding. For example, when Judge Ali sent $2 billion overseas over the president's national security review to fund Judge Ali's Hamas buddies, then what needs to happen is that $2 billion needs to come out of the federal judiciary's $10 billion annual budget. So if the Supreme Court's going to let Judge Ali piss away $2 billion, then it's going to come, 20% is coming right out of the federal judiciary's budget. I think that would get the Supreme Court's attention very fast. So on our Article 3 project website, we have action items on both Judge Ali's $2 billion grab and Boasberg's impeachment, because you know what, we have to put political pressure on these judges when they climb into the political arena. If they're going to throw political punches, they're going to get political counterpunches. These judges have to stay in their lane. They wear robes, not capes. They have a very modest role, and it's a crucial role, decide cases and controversies of the parties before their court with redressable claims. Nothing more, nothing less.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for clarifying these incredibly important issues that are so often misunderstood in the legal battles. And what we've discussed here today is not just about court filings or political headlines. It's really about the very structure of our Constitution and the rule of law. And our founders were amazing people. They were incredibly smart. They anticipated a lot of stuff when they put together the Constitution. And their fail-safe was we the people. And that's what happened last November. We the people actually understood that we were about to lose everything. And they stood up and they made themselves heard. And for our audience, I hope you understand that some of these issues are very complex. And we the people have a responsibility to inform ourselves about what the Constitution actually says. And we need to hold our representatives responsible. We can't just vote for the name that looks familiar. You need to know who these people are and whether they truly represent you. Makes all the difference in the world. And in the end, we need to realize that liberty is not self-sustaining. It takes knowledge, courage, and conviction. And all of us have a part to play in that. So, Mike, thanks again for your insights. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a patriot and a warrior to help preserve our freedom.
Thank you for that very calm talk, Dr. Carson.
And everybody, until next time, remember the cornerstones: faith, liberty, community, and life. See you next week.